Hello and welcome everyone to our Thursday event, The Power of Collaboration, Creating Safer Communities. I want to welcome everyone who is joining us from across whatever lands they're joining us from today. We have a very exciting conversation with three amazing individuals who are doing work in their community as service providers, as mental health advocates, as sexual violence advocates. And so to get us started, and to start ourselves in a good way, I first would like to start off with a land acknowledgement. So as a third generation settler to this land, I personally would like to express my gratitude to the Indigenous peoples and nations for their stewardship of this land, both throughout the generations, and humbly acknowledge their enduring and ongoing connection to the land, to the water, and all living beings on this earth. And so I'd like to acknowledge also that we as Sexual Assault Services of Saskatchewan are hosting this webinar from Treaty 4 territory today, the traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe, Nahiawak, Nakota, Dakota, Lakota, and Métis nations. And while SAS is located on Treaty 4 territory, I'd like to acknowledge that our work is, as a provincial organization, also encompasses all of the other Indigenous and original people territories across Saskatchewan, as well as the Métis peoples as well. And as an organization who provides support and advocacy to survivors of sexual violence, we recognize that the impacts of colonization on Indigenous peoples, on families and communities, and that we recognize that our journey of truth and reconciliation through our work and our vision so that every person in Saskatchewan is free from the threat, fear, or experience of sexual violence. We're committed to recognizing the significance of this land, honoring its past, and actively contributing to a more inclusive and equitable future, as we believe that there can be no real systemic change that's not centered in decolonizing principles and reconciliation. And so I would like to now introduce Elder Judy Pelly to offer a prayer to help center us into this conversation that we'll share together today and to begin our discussion in a good way.
I just wanted to say again what an honor it is to be a part of these very important events, especially when we're dealing with such subjects that people, hard conversations we need to have and that people don't want to talk about. And I just what an awesome group of people to be able to address these issues that have never really been addressed at this level in the past. And just kudos to you for all the good work you do. And I also wanted to share that we don't use technology when we're saying our ceremonial prayer in our language and how we were taught by our elders. So I'm very fortunately that I'm at the First Nations University of Canada, Prince Albert campus. And I was able to attend a pipe ceremony this morning. And in that ceremony, I included all of you in those prayers that we all will continue our good work together to continue to live the 7 sacred teachings, mainly love, respect, truth, and bravery, the courage to keep seeing the things, the hard conversations we need to have, and to have the bravery and courage to meet these challenges head on and keep doing the best work we can in whatever capacity we have. And again, I included you in my prayers this morning at the pipe ceremony, that your families are going to have a wonderful weekend and that good karma follows all of you in your lives. Creator already knows what you need, and Creator God, or a higher power, as you know him, knows what our needs are. So with that, Chimigwich for having me, and I will keep you in my prayers this weekend. Thank you. Have a good meeting.
Thank you very much, Elder Judy. We appreciate your prayers so much, and thank you for inclusion in the teaching as well, that technology and prayer aren't always put together. So thank you so much. And I would like to just give our short little introduction about who Sexual Assault Services is, what we do, just for some of the folks who may not know today. So SAS is a provincial nonprofit organization that works collectively with frontline agencies, community partners, and governments that provide support and advocacy for those affected by sexual violence in Saskatchewan. And our work centers on 4 core areas, which is research, education, policy development, and advocacy. And so you're joining us us now during Sexual Violence Awareness Week, which is declared each May by SAS and the government of Saskatchewan to recognize and raise awareness for the issues related to sexual violence in Saskatchewan. And so this year, we're examining how we can create safe communities free from sexual violence, guided by this theme of the power of collaboration, creating safe communities, and what that looks like, what that feels like. And so why Sexual Violence Awareness Week matters is that Saskatchewan actually has the highest rates of sexual violence in Canada, one of the highest rates. It's double the national average, and this rate is disproportionately higher for young people between the ages of 13 to 24, folks who are marginalized, including Indigenous women and girls, members of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, racialized individuals, as well as those living with disabilities, be that cognitive or physical. But we also recognize sexual assault can happen to any person at any age, at any time, and it happens every single day. And so part of taking on this leadership role is being able to advance an inclusive conversation and approach to addressing sexual violence. And so this public education that we're doing today is very specific to include kind of the prevalence of sexual violence in our province and kind of continuing to destigmatize these conversations. And today we're having conversations with two men to explore kind of what we can do and how we can facilitate safer communities. And so before we kind of jump in, I just want to acknowledge that the content being discussed today might be sensitive or potentially triggering to folks. And so we recognize that many of the people joining us today and our speakers as well have lived experience of sexual violence, either direct or indirect, or someone in their lives do. And so at any point, if you're needing support, please do not hesitate to reach out to SAS. You can give us a call or visit us on our website, and we'll pop the link in the chat as well. That you have that information. And so without further ado, I want to introduce our lovely panel of speakers. And so first and foremost, I'll introduce Lorie Harrison from Heartsong Complex Trauma Center. So she's the executive director of Heartsong Complex Trauma Program. She's, which is a registered Canadian charity. It serves all survivors, adult survivors of childhood sexual trauma and abuse, as well as victims and survivors of exploitation and abuse of power. So all of the funds raised for Heartsong Complex Trauma Center are through partnerships and collaborative working relationships with other organizations that allow Heartsong to offer low and no cost long-term counseling to survivors of complex trauma and sexual abuse. And Lorie Harrison's a registered professional counselor. She's a master practitioner in clinical counseling, and she's had the privilege to support the healing journey of many people who've experienced the betrayal and developmental trauma, as well as interpersonal violence and sexual abuse. She has education in addictions counseling that led her to work with people experiencing eating disorders, addiction, and underlying trauma before focusing on those who've experienced complex trauma and PTSD. So Lorie shares her time between offices in Saskatoon and Regina with Heartsong, and she has a private practice in Outlook, Saskatchewan that includes counseling as well as teaching mindfulness, meditation, educational and wellness workshops. So Lorie is a prairie girl at heart and enjoys photography, particularly skyscapes from the land of the living sky. So welcome, Lorie. Thank you for being here today. And next, I would like to introduce Todd Rennehbohm. And so Todd is a Saskatchewan-based mental health advocate and addiction support worker. He's also a children's book author and podcaster. His mental health advocacy work has taken him to meetings in the legislature, multiple speaking engagements, and initiated the creation of a mental health minister, actually, for the province of Saskatchewan. On his podcast, Bunny Hugs and Mental Health, Todd speaks with people from all walks of life, including Zach Williams, son of our beloved actor Robin Williams, comedian Jeremy Holtz, sports journalist Michael Landsberg from TSN, and he speaks about all things mental health. We'll also drop the link to his podcast. Todd's children's book that he wrote is called Sometimes Daddy Cries. It's received rave reviews from mental health professionals and parents, and it's a book that's told through the eyes of a child whose father's suffering from depression, all while comparing their father's depression to a physical ailment. And you can purchase a copy of Sometimes Daddy Cries on Amazon. We'll also provide the link below. And last but definitely not least, we have Emmanuel Flores Abad, and we're excited to welcome him from Toronto. But Emmanuel Flores is an advocate for men's mental health. As a victim of sexual abuse, he's made it his life mission to speak out in the hopes of inspiring others. Emmanuel Flores is also the author of a soon-to-be published book that is called Men Don't Get Raped. And he is also a restaurant owner and a passionate triathlete. Welcome all of you to this conversational space. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you, Christina.
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so welcome all of you. So we've had the pleasure of having kind of conversations about sort of these ideas about how specifically we define gender and gender expression, and specifically how society kind of tells us that we need to subscribe to certain ways to be. And so I guess to kind of get us started, to ground us into what we're going to be talking about, I guess my first question for each of you individually, now that you're in this stage of your lives and your healing journey and your practice, what does masculinity mean to you personally? Who wants to go first?
Emmanuel does.
Thank you, Todd, for volunteering me. I think in our conversations, we've talked about this, but I will mention it. In the world, there is about 3.97 billion men. So for me, there's 3.97 billion descriptions of what a man or masculinity is. There's not a one fits all kind of recipe. We're all different. Unfortunately, society has made a description of what a real man is to everyone, and it's kind of like a little box where we have to fit in that doesn't allow certain things. And it's the stereotypical men do not cry, men do not share, men do not express themselves. And yeah, it's for me, men or real men, it's catered, or it's described mainly just how I am. I'm a real man, the same way as Todd is a real man, and everyone listening to this conversation is a real man or is a real masculine man on their own ways.
Todd?
I've been thinking about this for the last few days. I still don't have maybe a great answer, but honestly, what masculinity, when I think of masculinity, I think of, this is a stupid answer, but the opposite of feminine. Basically, like, to me, it's a physical thing. So if if society thinks you don't look feminine, then I suppose you're either androgynous or masculine. But to me, there is no, like, masculinity isn't a type of behavior or a character trait or anything like that. So anytime I think of masculinity, I just think of someone that presents as male, I suppose.
Or like identify just as a man, just identify, like you say you're a man, okay. And there's 3.97 billion ways in which you can do
look.
that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Wow. And Lorie, from a clinical practice, what's your perspective?
So when I'm working with male clients, particularly in the realm of sexual violence, I really ask them to start to deconstruct what were their socialized messages, family messages, and really look at it from a role perspective, roles, responsibilities, privileges, obligations. What were those messages and how have they been embedded? And how does it impact your everyday life? Really, that portrayal of how do you engage in the world based on the beliefs or assumptions or expectations of self and others.
Does that elicit any thoughts from you, Emmanuel or Todd?
I thought of that too, like over the last couple of days. Is it things like expectations from society. Is that what masculinity is, or taking responsible for bringing home the bacon and all that stuff? But to me, this is just me personally, that doesn't mean masculinity to me,
Mm.
because I don't bring
I
home
mean-
bacon.
I mean, when we go based on what Lorie was explaining and based on what I was talking initially, yeah, we have to sometimes deconstruct this description or that definition that society has given us of what masculinity is or what a man is. And that's where the title of my book comes from. It's Men Don't Get Raped, because we have that when you think on rape and when you think on someone getting raped, the first or typically the first person or the first scenario is men raped a woman. And very unlikely, and even when you research it, when you research the word rape, you are very unlikely get the result immediately of men getting raped by men. So we don't think this. We don't talk about all this kind of scenarios that are actually happening every day in our lives. So for me, I speak about, and the title of the book is Men Don't Get Raped, because that's a lot of that's how I felt for many years. Men don't get raped. So what am I? What does that makes me? Because I'm a man, or at least I thought I was a man, and I got raped. And that's a part of what Lorie was speaking of, deconstructing a lot of those ideas and a lot of those definitions that society has put in our heads, like the fact men don't cry. I mean, it's Todd's book says it, right? Sometimes Daddy cries. But it's funny how through a certain period of our childhood, it was acceptable to cry as a man. And eventually there was a point in our lives that it became unacceptable. And all of a sudden, one of our main core emotions had to be suppressed and almost like ripped a part of from inside our bodies, just so we can be part of that definition of what being masculine is or what a man is supposed to be. So I feel those are the conversations and those are the kind of things that we have to reevaluate and as a society bring up to the surface again. Is no, those definitions were wrong. Let's unlearn them and let's learn new things, and let's free men from those stigmas that have kept them enslaved and in chains for a very long time.
Mm. Wow.
Mhm. Yeah, and yeah, and when you titled your book, I mean, I think I was on the same kind of brain wavelength as you when I titled my book too. So I wanted something that was like, kind of took people off guard a little bit, something that's not the norm when you think of man or masculinity. And it's been effective, but also I find a lot, I don't know if I've actually handed over a book to a man. I think it's still females buying the book for their husband or for their children because their husband is going through some kind of mental health issue or mental illness issue. So I agree that I don't think, even though we're trying, I don't think there's a lot of men, maybe not where I've been selling books anyway, that are still comfortable enough to open up enough to even buy a book to help themselves or to help their children even understand. I think it's more acceptable to be angry and have aggression when men are going through emotional things. And I saw a meme a while ago that said anger is depression's bodyguard. And I thought, boy, that hits home, because I know a lot of men that way. You know?
Yeah. And so, I mean, not to force disclosures or anything by either of you, but Todd, you've also been very open. And I think, Emmanuel, this connects to this idea. And Lorie, if you want to jump in as well, this idea of like, what is stopping men from being able to take that first step to buy a book that might help them with this title that maybe makes sense in their brain, that I might need this, but there's that resistance. What do you think is the reason for that?
Emmanuel, you go ahead. I can't see if you're ready to talk, but
I I think it all ties with a few concepts, but one of the main ones is men don't, or we're not supposed to be weak. And sometimes even reaching for the self-help books, or attending a therapy, or even sometimes being part of a conference like this one. Um, it just, it shows some kind of weakness. It shows that there's something wrong with you, or at least that's what other people could perceive, that there's something wrong, and that's why you have to look after you, or fix something. Because a real man doesn't have to be fixed. A real man is just that way, right? So buying a book that it's providing some kind of self-help, or even something like a kid's book, like Todd's, sometimes Daddy Cries, it just kind of like opening a can of worms for a lot of men, being like, well, yes, that's how I feel, but that's not how am I supposed to feel. I'm not supposed to feel that I'm sad. I'm not supposed to feel like I don't have everything together. That's not what it's supposed, because I mean, we have that stereotype that men don't ask for help, don't ask for directions, even when they're driving. And it all comes from the fact that we just don't ask for help, because we're not supposed to. Asking for help means that we're weak. And there's nothing that another man is more afraid of than another man. So being criticized by another man for our actions, it's something that we want to admit it or not, we're terribly afraid of. So I feel that's where a lot of the decision making and men that are not buying some of those books comes from. They just don't want to be criticized. It is easier that to be handed the book by their wife and just kind of like keep it in secret. And I mean, I talk by personal experience. Through my life, when I decided to actually reach out for help and actually get counseling and get therapy, I actually purposely decided to look or accept the therapy from a woman, because I was still afraid of actually taking therapy from another male. And that tells you how engraved on us all of that is, and all those stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes too, a lot of men just don't know how to process their emotions. They don't even realize that they're depressed or have anxiety, because it comes out in anger. It's just the go-to, because of either that's what society has shown them to do, or generations of family members, that's how they deal with it. So I think sometimes a lot of men just don't even know. So then it comes out as anger and stuff. And especially like I live in a province where the capital city is Regina, and the city just had a tourism logo that was called one of the slogans was "Show us your Regina." It's like that's one of the like when we're living in a province where it's very misogynistic, perhaps it's harder to be open. I mean, I don't know what it's like all over the world or in other countries, but I'm assuming it's similar. So yeah, I think a lot of men, like you said, are scared to be weak. A lot of men don't understand. And Emmanuel, you said in a conversation we've had before, it's almost like you have to give permission. So if you open up first, it's almost like giving them permission, another man permission to then open up. Because I think a lot of men want to, they don't know how to initiate the conversation. So it's like we have to take the responsibility to give them that permission and to initiate that conversation.
Wow. And Lorie, as somebody who counsels men, and kind of they've actually been able to kind of move to that next step and actually proceed through counseling. And she's a little bit frozen for a second, so hopefully she'll pop back. So just wanting to explore that kind of idea of men, once they've sort of like made that first step to come and make their first appointment with you, does all of this language make sense to you in your practice, Lorie?
Very much so. This, I would concur with Emmanuel that many of my male clients specifically, do come to a female. And I think we also need to understand how deeply shame is embedded in sexual violence, and how
I think we lost her for a second.
The joys of rural internet.
I am still here. Am I back?
There you're back. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Yes, rural internet. So what prompts someone to change, right? Crisis or opportunity and invitation. So
Mm.
conversations like this create a landscape where our belief systems can be identified, challenged enough to open a door to there might be another opportunity, another way. And that in and of itself may be the ability to step over the shame or at least acknowledge it as a normal, acknowledged, anticipated response to trauma, to sexual violence, to having experienced victimization in some way. It's a natural outcome.
Wow.
Mhm.
That idea of shame, that is so powerful. And so I imagine in both all of you, Todd, Emmanuel, and Lorie, in your practice with clients too, that aspect and idea of shame or guilt and that kind of inward looking or feeling a burden. Emmanuel, Todd, how were you able to kind of overcome those? Because I mean, it's a journey of 1,000 small little steps, right? With mental health, addictions, being survivors of sexual assault and abuse. What allowed you to kind of take that first step to be like, I think I need help here?
Well, for me, it was a very, very long journey. I mean, I've struggled with all types of different mental health issues and ailments. I just was recently diagnosed with ADHD, which now kind of sums up, oh, okay, that's why I had all these other issues under this umbrella. But I did have some sexual trauma when I was younger, and it was child on child. And I say sexual trauma because I don't feel like I was a victim to a predator per se, but I was just a victim of circumstance, perhaps. But yeah, that shame thing, because well, we've discussed this, I forgot the term again, but your body reacts to stimulus. So then, it's like, did I like that? Well, I mean, it felt good, but I didn't like it because, so then there is that big shame thing. And so for me, it's like I had to do a whole bunch of other healing first before I was comfortable to heal, to open up and to talk about this specific trauma. So it is a long journey. Like if I would have just started talking about it 10 years ago, I think my healing journey probably would have crashed and burned real quick. I just wasn't ready to talk about that because I needed, I needed to heal some other things first and get comfortable before I could open up. That and having discussions with other men about their abuses when I was in addiction treatment and stuff. You hear all types of stories from all types of people, and it was like, oh, okay, well, this guy is a big scary dude, and he's talking about horrible stuff that happened to him as a kid. So it's like I'm not, it's almost like, again, like what Emmanuel said, is like that almost gave me permission to dive deeper into my trauma and realize I can talk about this, and I'm not alone.
Was that similar for you, Emmanuel? Was there a moment like with a man or some like that allowed you to kind of start to take that journey?
I think for me there was a few other factors that initiated the healing, and I think like as a side effect, then everything started to just go down, just basically like a ripple effect, right? One by one of the pieces started falling. I feel like when you start healing a lot of different things, eventually others come up to the surface, and then you have to start healing those ones. And I mean, in my case, I started to have a very bad relationship with not just myself, but with my family, with my wife. And you could realize that there was a lot of different traumas that had to be healed, and there was a lot of different things, a lot of insecurities that were just keep popping up to the surface, and we're just creating this unpleasant person to hang out with. And I had to make those changes. I definitely saw a few men that were starting to open up, and that gave me that permission to myself to start opening up myself. And it definitely not just gave me the permission to open up myself, but it also inspired me to do that for others. Because if people around me don't, or in all if the men around us don't see that, at least from one person, we're just going to continue pretending to be this group of men that we're not. The moment one of us jumps out of the boat and says, I'm not this way anymore, I don't want to participate in this kind of conversations, I don't want to be part of this toxic behavior, all of a sudden everyone says, like, you know what, I have felt that way for many years, but I never had the courage to do it. Now I saw someone else doing it, I'm going to do it. And it just starts inspiring others to do it. So seeing other men do it gave me the permission and inspiration to take on this life mission now of help others had the same realization that I had, and to stop living oppressed by what society and the stigmas of everyone tells that we have to.
Wow. Wow.
I would
And
second that as well, that I think we also need to acknowledge the incongruency and confusion that comes in the way that sexuality is shamed. That for a female, it is different, whereas a male, I'm kind of reflecting on Corinne's comment in the chat about young men being teased if they disclose sexual assault. Historically, men would actually be congratulated for conquest, for sexual conquest. And how confusing is that? I can only imagine how confusing that is to a male in general, but particularly if it has been sexual violence or sexual assault. And so, whereas women are perhaps, for sexual activity are more shamed, judged, or labeled, still historically, men are actually rewarded with that locker room type of talk in those environments. And how difficult that is for men to then come forward and say, this isn't what I wanted.
Yeah, actually, Lorie, it's even rewarded male on male when you think
Absolutely.
of like hazing and these
Absolutely.
military and like now, like the hockey, Canada is like in trouble for initiations and stuff and locker rooms and stuff, and it's all basically sexual assault, and it's a big joke, and so yeah, there's still whether it's male on male or male or female, there's still a conquest, or I forget the word you used.
Yeah, conquest. It's a celebration, right? There's a congratulations that goes in that realm that is disturbing.
Yeah.
wow. And yeah, so to kind of like basically have a fundamental building block of masculinity, what it means to be a man, being a sexual experience, but a very specific type of sexual experience, ideally with a woman. But yeah, now if we like layer that with locker room talk and individuals being survivors of sexual assault, when those conversations are happening in locker rooms. And again, if we think of just the statistics, 1 in 6, we know it's likely higher than that. So if you're in your hockey team, soccer team, whatever, in that locker room, there's a few folks that are in that room, in that space, who have experienced sexual abuse, sexual trauma recently or historically. So how do we, create spaces then, I guess, for men? Because how do you feel comfortable to talk to your buddy or your friend who's on your soccer team who's making these comments? So how can we foster conditions for vulnerability?
I want to like bring out something, and it's so important because right now there's been a lot, and we've mentioned it like through this conversation, but there's been a lot of talk worldwide about the toxic masculinity and all these different things. I never like to refer it as to it as toxic masculinity, because I personally do not think that being masculine is toxic. I feel we have a misguided, at least in my description, there's a misguided masculinity where we have defined in many ways, in wrong ways, what a masculine or a man should be and how he should act. And that's where I actually have a little quote of myself that says, if we provide safe spaces for men to be vulnerable, we are creating a world where everyone else can be free. And what I mean by this is, it's incredible the amount of ripple effect that we will get from allowing men to actually be real men, be vulnerable and emotional men. We will create a world where men are not necessarily being misogynist, where they're not being racist, where they're not being attacking other men or attacking women, where there will maybe we will reduce the amount of femicides that is around the world, because a lot of these men that perpetrate some of these acts, they just don't know how to express themselves. They've been enclosed in that little box, sometimes being victims of some of the same crimes, and they're just going around repeating them. So when we created safe spaces for men to actually express themselves, to for some boys, and going back to that comment somebody from the Q&A saying like, yeah, a man is teased for opening himself up or opening a boy, and they're getting teased. We ridicule any man that shows any kind of emotions. Now imagine a man that shows the kind of that has the courage to open himself up and say, I was raped, and then we tease him. That man is not going to talk again for a very long time, until at least he reaches a level of healing that allows him to start talking again. But for some time, he's going to just keep everything inside, bottle everything up, and that is only by consequence going to create a very aggressive man, a man that is just very explosive, and that might be dangerous in terms of, because he just doesn't know how to control anything inside of himself. And I talk about myself there. For many years of my life, I was just not emotionally available to anyone, and the only way that I will allow myself to express emotions was through violence, and because that was the only thing that it was socially acceptable for a man to show. So eventually, when I reached my healing, or at least when I reached the healing journey, because it's never ending, at least I was able to allow myself now, I reintroduce some of the emotions, core emotions that are part of our life, and express myself in those emotions and in those ways, except instead of violence. Mm-hmm. So we gotta create a chain of reactions. We gotta allow men to get out of that stigma, so these men can stop locker room talk, so they can be more empathic when they're talking about a woman, when they're talking about other men, where a woman can walk free on the street because they know that this man is not going to be like all of a sudden talking to her in very disrespectful ways. And we gotta allow men to feel the courage to talk and to actually correct other men when they're being disrespectful, and when they're having that locker room talk, and not start calling their names because they're actually like, oh, what are you gay, or why you don't want to talk about this, or why are you like we got to stop doing that to men, and men need to stop doing it to men.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that quote, Emmanuel, because I had it in mind. I was going to ask you about it. I love that. Once you make safe spaces for men, then you basically set the whole world free, because there's this ripple effect. And I'm so glad you brought that up. But that said, I know we've talked about this before, and I'm guilty of it. I sometimes make other men feel less than. And I mean, I'm usually aware of it afterwards, or, what am I trying to say here? I don't like doing it. Oh God, I just made myself look real guilty there, didn't I?
No, but you like, it's accountability for our actions, right? We don't do everything perfectly, right? And we can reflect and be like, oh no, like that, I don't feel comfortable. But Lorie or Emmanuel, do you have any comment about that as well?
I mean, I think that was like, you're bringing this up, Todd, because we had this conversation about how, yes, I mean, men make other men feel not enough. And I mean, I don't want to leave it behind that women also make men not feel enough. And that's something that as well, men do it to women, men make women not feel enough. And we all make ourselves not feel enough in many ways, right? But men have the mistake of always trying to compete with other men of who is more man enough. Who's the bigger man? And we have this comparison, Todd, where sometimes it's so silly, but I mean, I've been I've been I've actually done this, and I'm guilty of this, where sometimes a man is parked on a stoplight waiting for the light to go green, and there's another man on the car beside you, and it kind of like you just give yourself the stare look and be like, who's going to hold the badass stare look the longest, right? And if he actually turns out the other way, then you're like, well, I'm the real man because I was all be able to hold it the longest, right? Sometimes there's so many silly little things that we do through our lives that sometimes make other men feel not enough. The same way, again, women sometimes do all these little things that make a man not feel enough, like not wanting to date a short guy or not wanting to date certain type of guys. And then that just like reinforces the stereotype of what a man should look like or be, right? So it is very important that we start looking at all the areas where we are being guilty of making someone else feel not enough, and then look at the ways that we can become allies. Men could become allies to women in many movements, and women can become allies to men in many movements, and men can become allies to other men in many ways. And that's kind of like what we're doing and what Todd is trying to do, what I'm trying to do. We're trying to create an like we become allies to others. And at least for me, I know I'm doing it for men, but because I know the moment I start changing some of the men even around me, by side effect, they're just going to be less disrespectful to women. They're going to be more empathic, maybe to their own children and to other men in their lives.
And to themselves.
To themselves, the most important.
Wow, I love that, even the to themselves, because I think even when you were talking about this idea of violence, enacting it, I mean, that can be enacting it to others, but that can be enacting it against self, right? With coping mechanisms, with self-harm, with other things like suicidality as well. And there's a question in the chat that I think is really interesting. So what do you think would work then, or any suggestions to help people feel enough, even in those small moments?
I mean, I think one of the first things is we need to stop criticizing others from being different, or from doing something that is not the norm. We need to stop criticizing others and judging others mainly, and making them feel ashamed of the way they are. I'm going to share a little ritual that I have with my kids, because I do feel that making kids feel enough, it is one of the best steps for me as a father to create a bigger society, because we got to change these generations, right? But I try to follow this ritual as daily as possible, where I ask my kids a question that is, what are you? And their answers at the beginning, it was guided by me. And I will tell them, when I ask you, what are you? I want you to respond, I am brave, I am strong, I am happy, I am beautiful, and am I smart? And after that, I will ask them, and who do you love the most? And the response, it was myself. And we made it a ritual where now they've actually added many things of themselves. Now they add things like, I'm kind and I'm empathic, and they added of their own. They just want to keep adding to the list, right? And I feel this is something where we can also like promote it with adults. I do it with my kids, but we got promoted with others, and especially with adults. You're enough. Like, what you're doing is enough, and you're trying your best. And as long as you're doing that, you are enough. And no matter what you're doing, you're enough. And I feel that's very important. I mean, we're not always going to reach perfection, because no one can be perfect, but unfortunately we hold everyone to very high standards. And maybe that's one of the things. We need to stop holding people to very high standards and holding ourselves to very high standards, and starting from those little things. I mean, we can have a whole conversation of how to make other one feel enough, but sometimes it's just starting from the little things.
When I was in addiction treatment, every session started with, how are you feeling? And even that is powerful, because you really have to think about emotions and find the emotion. And so then you're able to process the emotion if you can actually identify it, which was really powerful too. And a lot of times people would say good, and then my counselor said French fries are good. Like, you're not good. Give me an emotion. What are you feeling? And it was really powerful. Every day, 3 times a day, we would have to really think about our emotions and figure out what we were feeling. And so then so then maybe you can recognize that later in life. This is the emotion I'm feeling. I'm not actually angry. I'm just using anger to express my sadness or my depression or my frustration or my anxiety, whatever. So yeah, small things like that.
I think I would add to that as individuals, the more that we can become or choose to become trauma informed, the more that we can start to understand the impact of our language, not only on others, but on our own belief systems. Very intentionally recognizing that, so for example, even sexual violence, for many people, sexual trauma, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation did not appear initially violent. And so it can be difficult for a person to self-describe that, yes, this happened to me and it was confusing and chaotic. So if we can really start to reframe and understand it from a trauma-informed lens, that actually creates a roadmap for us to be better allies, right? Ways that we can engage that are trauma-informed. And really recognizing that for some people, the word victim is really valid and important as part of the validation of understanding of experience. For others, the word survivor is a better fit. For some, it may transfer from victim to survivor. For some people, it's identifying I was victimized. And there is nobody outside of personal experience that should be able to dictate that. If we can create safe spaces to explore what does that mean to you in your experience, then people can actually empower themselves as a part of the trauma-informed lens.
Wow.
Which then in turn makes you feel more than
capable, more than seen, validated, witnessed, honored.
Right.
Wow. So Todd or Emmanuel, like along your journey, was there a specific time or moment where someone met you with that allowed you to feel seen, heard, validated, all those feelings that Lorie is describing? I mean, even if it's a moment to shout out some folks in your life, but was there for you that type of moment where someone specifically, like, you told your story to and they supported you with that respect and dignity that was helpful for you?
For me, it was probably addiction treatment was the one that really was that role in my life. Like the other clients there, and my counselor, and also my sponsor, my AA sponsor as well. I mean, there's just such a understanding, non-judgmental group that have heard everything. So yeah, I think that, and that was about a little over 6 years ago. So I was 39 years old before I really felt, I could, before I really got inspired by someone and felt safe enough to talk about it.
Wow. Carrying that for the decades yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Emmanuel?
I think for me, definitely therapy was one of the primary moments where I started to feel heard and where someone was actually paying attention to what I was talking about, and that was helping me go through some of those hard moments. Taking therapy definitely was a breaking point for me. But my wife was certainly a key piece on my healing. And in many ways, I've said it, and I can't thank her enough for the patience, because that is one of the other things where with men is that men don't necessarily have a good group of friends that they can talk to you. And so what happens by consequence is that their wives become almost like the in-home therapist, where you as a man come home and just kind of like dump all your stuff on her. And it is very hard. And at least I speak from personal experience for my wife. I know it was very challenging. I know it was rough to like handle her own things and then end up having to handle my stuff, right? And but she definitely was that key person that provided me with a safe space, provided me with the necessary resources. And by resources, it just sometimes it's just space, and a space to allow yourself to heal. um and eventually, obviously, now as you start healing, you start creating a good circle of friends around you, or at least a good circle of people around you, and humans that start supporting that.
Yeah. I'd like to add to that. Like, it took me a long time to open up to my wife. She was because of I didn't want her to look at me differently. Didn't want her to look at me like I was not strong. I was weak. I was these things. I was, because having male on male sexual trauma, there is shame, right? I didn't want her view of me to change. So it took me a long time to actually open up to my wife. Plus, she was having her own trauma issues that she's trying to deal with, and I didn't want to, extra dump on her. But of course, now we're both at a healing process, so we can be completely open with each other and stuff. But yeah.
Lorie, is that a common theme that you hear as well?
Yeah, very much so. It is, I think most would acknowledge that it is more difficult for men to find safe spaces to be emotionally vulnerable. That is reality. Socially, women, it's more acceptable for women to express more vulnerable emotions. And I think on top of that, though, is the recognition of one of the outcomes of trauma is your trust is impacted, particularly if it's betrayal trauma, if it's sexual trauma, right? Your trust is impacted. Having rejected vulnerability as a way of creating safety, emotional vulnerability. So if we understand that this is a normal outcome, then it creates an opportunity to discuss that, for example, being hyper independent afterwards. I don't need anybody. I'm going to not talk. I'm not going to trust, and I'm not going to feel. Become the outcome, the self-defined rules to create safety. So expanding what safety looks like becomes a really important dialogue to have.
Wow. So how do we do that then? How do we do that? Expand.
We're doing it.
We're doing it.
I will agree with Todd. I will certainly agree with Todd. I think this is the kind of things that have to be done and that have to happen within our society. They have to happen more often in order for us to keep the conversation going. Not just that it happens once a week, that happens once a month, but that happens through our daily lives, where we're constantly talking about this, where we're constantly bringing awareness to this, and creating safe spaces for everyone, not just for men, but for women, and for absolutely everyone in society to just feel respected, to feel accepted, and to feel validated. So this is the kind of things that we have to do. And eventually, as the time goes on, men will start making the changes, and we will start making a positive change. And I've said it in some of our last conversations, but women have asked us for a very long time to do some of these changes. Many women have tried to push us to like be more emotional. I mean, there's a question on the Q&A: how do I make a man be less misogynistic, especially when he has a daughter? And I think there's a lot of work that women have tried to do. But where I'm coming with this point is that, unfortunately, men are not always going to listen to women. So we have to provide, and other men have to provide that space and have to provide, like almost give that permission. So it's the job of all of us as allies, but it's the job of men that have reached a point in their lives where they're healed and they are capable of spreading awareness and love and all of these things to start being the leaders of this movement.
Wow. Thank you all so much. I know we like barely scratched the surface, and I would love the opportunity to speak more with you. Thank you, Lorie. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Todd, so much. There's other questions and awesome feedback that I will provide to you as well. Thank you all for joining us. I have Elder Judy Pelly back with us just to finish off our day as well. We will ensure that anyone who registered gets the information to both Emmanuel and Todd's book, as well as links to Heart Song Complex Trauma Program as well. Thank you all. And with that, I will put myself on mute and pass the baton over to Elder Judy to allow us to close our day, get rid of this kind of energy of these important conversations, and that we can step out into the rest of our Thursday in a good way. Elder Judy.
And for just listening to the last speaker there, and to having men in these conversations. I've done a couple circles not too long ago at Comfy, which is a urban Métis center, and it was the men's group, and talking about these very sensitive subjects as well. It included sexual abuse of women and all these things. And so it's so good that we can start talking about it, and the stigma, even if there is a stigma, but there's still, people are opening up now and men are seeking help. Gilbert Q-Step and his son have started a men's group as well, where they talk about all these things, because our men were just as damaged as any of the women, and which became intergenerational, the trauma and the sexual abuse that's still happening in our communities, and that we address those and speak to them openly, and really good to hear that we're having the bravery and the courage to speak out about things that we don't want to speak about. So I just continue the dialogue, and hopefully next time I could stay through the whole thing. Sometimes I double book myself without even thinking. Someday I'll get a manager. I think as I get older, I'm getting more forgetful sometimes, and so. But I want to keep doing the work I'm doing forever, I guess, until I can't do it anymore. And I always say thank you so much for having me in these conversations, and that my prayers go out to all of you, as I said, at pipe ceremony, and I will light the smudge and hope that all of you have a really good long weekend with your families, and that you continue doing your good work. Thank you. Miigwech. Hi, hi.
Hi, hi. Thank you, everyone. And with that, we have follow us on social media. We'll ensure you get all of the links that you need. Thank you very much for joining us for this 1 hour over your lunchtime. And we will be seeing you soon with other events and speakers. So please keep posted with our social media. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.